Okay, so thank you all so much for coming. This is my presentation, I Wish My Life Was Like This, Queer Identity Work in BL Fandom. My name is Caitlin Joyce, and I'm from Temple University. So just a little bit about me to introduce myself. I've been studying BL for quite a while now. I have a BA in sociology with a focus in gender and sexuality studies and cultural anthropology. I have a master's in sociology and a graduate certificate in gender, sexuality, and women's studies. And I'm currently working on a doctor of philosophy in sociology at Temple University. So what this presentation is, it's a little bit of an amalgamation of past presentations I've given at anime conventions and also my current research presentations that I've been giving at academic conferences. So if you've seen me present at either ZenkaiCon or KatsuCon, we have something new for you. If you happen to be at the academic conference I was at in Bloomington, Indiana this summer, there's something new here for you as well. So I will get started. Just a little bit about my origin story. So I became interested in studying BL/yaoi back when I was an undergraduate in college and trying to figure out what to do for my senior thesis. And I saw this tweet and it just sparked my imagination. So what this tweet says is yaoi was made after World War II to help Japan's economy, and it was made by straight women and for straight women, and not made for queer men at all. Now tell me how that's not even slightly fetishization of queer men. So I don't think you need a degree to see that this tweet maybe isn't factual, but it got me curious about some different aspects of BL yaoi. So if we put our sociology goggles on, I want to unpack this. So there's a few points that got me interested in potential research projects. Number one, the phrase yaoi. What exactly do we mean when we say yaoi? Number two, the historical context. Was it made after World War II to help Japan's economy? Number three, is it actually by and for straight women and not for queer men? And finally, is it fetishizing queer men? So let's define BL yaoi. I think because this is a BL convention, most people here are probably more familiar with the term than those at my academic conferences. But let's just get into it. So is Given a BL? This is pretty obvious, right? We can confidently say, yes, that is a Japanese BL comic that is sold under the BL genre in bookstores. We know for sure that this is a BL. The next one is a doujinshi, but it has American comic characters. Does this count as BL? Does it matter if the characters are Japanese? Does it matter if the authors are Japanese? I would still say that this is a BL, but is there contention there? I don't know. Is it BL if it's Tweek and Craig from South Park? That's a Western media type. Some people would probably say fan fiction of Tweek and Craig or fan art. Is that BL? Some people might say yes, some people might say no. And Heartstopper, this, the TV show or the comic series, this is made by a non-binary author who is not Japanese, the setting is not Japanese, the style is not Japanese, and yet this is still often sometimes sold under the BL genre in bookstores. So going even further, I find that fan art, even if it's not explicitly BL, people will still call it BL yaoi, and the same for fan fiction. So the point of this exercise is just to show that what people consider BL yaoi, what we might call BL yaoi in academia, is not actually how people are using these terms in real life. The definition is a lot muddier. Number two, the historical context. Was BL yaoi content created as a strategic plan to boost Japan's post-World War II economy? No. Again, I don't think you need a degree to solve this one. This one's Googleable. And when I do this presentation at academic or at anime conventions, I usually have like a history section of BL, but for the sake of time, we're just going to skip that. But just so what you need to know, no, BL was not created to save Japan post World War II. And this next few points is where my research really focuses on. So step 3, bi and 4 straight women. When I first saw this when I was an undergraduate, I began thinking about how it was strange to me because the majority of fans who were involved in what I'm loosely defining as MLM shipping culture, so BL yaoi, fan fiction, fan art creation, everyone that I at least personally knew in my social circle and in other people's social circles were LGBT+. I was kind of struggling to find heterosexual women in these spaces, and they are there, but there's a lot of gay people here. So that led me to my undergrad thesis, American Identities and the Consumption of Japanese Homoerotica, which was a large survey study. So the respondents were 18 plus, American, and were fans of what I was just loosely calling MLM Japanese fictional media. This was an open call survey. I had over 1,000 total responses, but I also had it so nobody was forced to answer a question. Respondents could skip any question they weren't comfortable answering. So that's just to let you know the totals for each graph I'm about to show are different. So let's see, bi and 4 straight women. When I asked about gender, I found that gender and sexuality, I found that only 72 respondents were heterosexual women, which is 8% of the survey sample. 92% was everyone else who is not a heterosexual woman. And I have to caveat and say that open call surveys cannot be considered representative, meaning that this isn't true. I can't make this claim that this is true for the entire BL fandom, but it's certainly indicative that heterosexual women are not the majority consumers necessarily as once thought. And so next I wanted to break it down a little bit more by gender, especially because I personally get frustrated with the way how survey studies will ask questions about gender and whether or not someone is transgender. So how these questions operated was I would ask somebody's gender identity label, which had selections as well as an open-end response, and then a follow-up question of do you identify as transgender? So as you can see from this graph, it is true, at least for my sample, that the majority of respondents were cisgender women. This was then followed by non-binary people and trans men. So I can at least uphold by this data that, yes, there are a lot of women in BL fandom. But particularly, my data complicates this claim of bi and 4 straight women. Overall, very gay. There was a majority of bisexual respondents, which was then followed by respondents who identify as asexual and homosexual. And this last step, I was curious about the claim of fetishizing queer men. So of the men who responded to my survey, that was 120, I found that there were a lot of queer men. But it didn't give me exactly answers on if this media is necessarily fetishizing queer men, then what are the thoughts and opinions of queer men who are in BL fandom? Which has led me to my graduate work, which I'm calling I Wish My Life Was Like This, Queer Identity Work in BL Fandom. So a little bit about where this study, the literature that it is drawing upon. So as many of you might know, BL yaoi, some of the discourse doesn't exactly cast it in a positive light. Past perspectives on BL yaoi have argued that it's not authentic gay media, especially in comparison to gay komi, because of the genre's use of, quote, the female gaze. But there are studies that are showing that some Japanese gay men do see BL yaoi as symbolically significant and authentic gay literature. But at the same time, there are also queer men who critique the genre for its depiction of failed men gender performances, meaning that the genre depicts men who are too feminine. And this is coming from some of Dr. Bonnet's work. And now, current BL studies is rapidly developing and building literature on non-Japanese audiences and LGBT audiences. And just some examples are James Welker's edited novel, Queer Transfigurations, more of Thomas Bonnet's work, and a recent survey study from Lavrentyeva et al. My personal argument, though, is that I believe that many queer men engage with this genre by exploring their identity through fantasy, specifically through escapism in what I am using the term aesthetic world, and I'll go on to define that more later, of BL yaoi media. Through this media, I argue that queer men are able to reimagine new possibilities for queer masculinity, and this masculinity is centering vulnerability and intimacy over other gender expressions of hypermasculinity or toxic masculinity. And the third prong of my argument that I'm still currently developing is this idea of parody as a form of identity talk, which is a way how people parody and banter is a way to destabilize heterosexism and compulsive heterosexuality. And all of these terms I'll go through and more clearly define further on. And a bit about the theoretical framework that I'm working with, I draw upon queer and feminist theory, such as terms like heteronormativity, or the way how our world is structured to value heterosexuality as the norm and natural way of being over other sexualities, and hegemonic masculinity, referring to the most pervasive ideal of what it means to be a man, which is often very constricting. I engage a lot with porn studies, which is a really awesome field in academia, which prioritizes engaging with pornography as text, products, productions, or performances, as occurring in various kinds of spaces with various significances, and with different importances for its participants and for observers of those participants. Which basically is saying that when we're talking about pornography or other kinds of erotic media, the question is not, is this good or bad? It's looking at what is the social significance of this media to society, and what does it say about our culture? And furthermore, I'm interested in how sexual fantasy can be a way to investigate the concealed, invisible spaces of identity. The concept that I'm borrowing from sociology that you're going to hear a lot in this presentation is identity work. And very broadly, it's referring to the range of activities that people engage in, both individually or collectively, to signify and express who they are and what they stand for. And this term, the aesthetic sphere, comes from communications and media studies, which refers to how media can work at the level of the social imaginary, providing important meaning, structures, and cultural scripts that individuals use in order to make sense of both themselves and the world around them. And for my actual study, what I did was I wanted to set out and find a Discord group where I could observe and interact and interview people who are in BL fandom. So I started to do participant observation, which is a type of ethnographic research where you're not just in there with a microscope observing people, you are engaging with them one-on-one as human beings. In a Discord group, which I am calling the Yaoi Association as a pseudonym. If you're from this Discord watching this presentation, I asked, just for the privacy of others, please do not say the name of the real Discord. So this is a large 1,500-ish public server on Discord, and there's roughly about 1,200 men. I get this statistic from the way how people use labels of gender on their profile. And the reason I chose this Discord specifically to find interviewees in was because there are so many men in this Discord channel. And like I said earlier, I was very curious about arguments that said that queer men don't like this genre is offensive to queer men. But obviously there's a lot of queer men in this server at the very least, so I thought it would be a great place to do my research. And from there, I've been doing interviews. I have 9 currently completed, with many more ongoing. Everyone who I interviewed all identified as men. They were all over the age of 18, obviously, and they identify as LGBT+, with the average age of 26. And all of my interviewees have been from mostly North America and Europe, mainly the US, UK, Canada, Portugal, and France. And all interviews were conducted in English. In exchange for being interviewed, I've been able to get funding for this project, which is great. So I've been offering compensation via either a Discord Nitro subscription or a $10 donation to an LGBT charity of their choice. And a few considerations that I've had while doing this research mainly is navigating privacy and security concerns, because many people who I would talk to would be interested in being interviewed, but didn't want to be interviewed via voice chat or a phone call, which is understandable, but many of my advisors were really trying to push for me to interview people through voice call, which I think is just part of this sociological tradition. But I've been able to push back against that because I understand many people are closeted, or if they live at home or with roommates or their family, they don't want others to hear them talking about their interest in BL and yaoi. So I've been able to do interviewing through instant messaging. Another consideration is the public-private sphere of Discord and what's considered public knowledge versus what is considered more private. And also an insider-outsider dynamic, where on the one hand, I'm an insider because I also like BL, and I'm also queer, but I'm also a woman, and I realize in this space that is mostly occupied by queer men, that means that I'm a little bit different, and I understand that there is a stereotype of heterosexual women being the only fans of BL. So I was just like very aware of my gender in this space and wanting to be respectful. So let's get into what I found, because I feel like that's the actually interesting part. So what I found is going into what I'm calling the aesthetic world of BL yaoi. I'm reminded of a quote by author Heidi Kolonen, who talks about in romance genre, the possibility of a happy ending is itself an act of revolution, of cultural inspiration. And so I found that many of my interviewees discussed with me how they really connect with this depiction of queer love that is unbridled by the constraints of heterosexism. Especially because, as one of my interviewees pointed out, queerness is often marked with this assumed trauma and adversity in mainstream media. So BL yaoi, sometimes having happier endings, was something that really resonated with them and gave them a sense of hope. And also, through engaging with this media, it became a site of exploration, of self-discovery and affirmation, when the rest of the world tends to cater to heterosexual sexual scripts. So a few quotes from interviewees. One was from Starosy, who was a bisexual man from Puerto Rico. He talked about how what draws me to BL yaoi as a whole, originally I was very in the closet. Getting into it helped me come out of my shell. It's important to me because it helped me realize who I am. And another quote from an interviewee named Guz talked about how when he had his first crush, he didn't really know what to do because culturally we teach people what to do when you have heterosexual crushes, but when you're gay, that all falls apart. So for him, he said, yaoi is kind of like a fantasy of some sort for a queer person, at least in my case. When we see a romantic story, we identify with it. We're like, oh, I wish my life was like this. And probably one of the most evocative interviews that I conducted was with an interviewee who has the pseudonym Blackbeard, who is a closeted gay man living in the South in the United States. And he is not out in his offline life because he's worried about the possibility of losing his job, of being ostracized by his family. So he only engages with his sexuality in his online life. And he described to me being engaged in yaoi BL fandom. It's a way to enjoy romance. Me, in real life, I don't have that luxury for a number of reasons. Watching yaoi or BL gives me an outlet. So I feel like that really is the strongest example of how people, especially queer men, may engage with this genre as a way to connect and understand and celebrate their sexuality, especially if they feel constrained by the outside world. And on my topic of reimagining queer masculinity, another common theme that I saw throughout my interviews is how BL yaoi narratives and imagery act as symbols of challenging hegemonic masculinity, or these traditional, very strict values of what it means to be a man. So interviewees often criticized BL yaoi that sticks too closely to seme-uge tropes because it's repetitive or it just didn't seem the way how real people would act. But many really resonated with characters who instead demonstrated a blend of both feminine and masculine traits. Particularly characters who were masculine in appearance, but didn't carry that same sense of toxic masculinity and instead had what was described as very soft qualities. For example, Jock from Boyfriends or Yakumo from New Carnival were both examples given to me. And another thing that I noticed just by being in this Discord and in BL fandom in general, there's this strong emphasis on embracing caretaking and having support and love for one another. So there were many discussions of, say, wanting to cuddle characters or valuing romance or wanting to nurse characters back to health. For example, respondents interacted with fan art of a beaten up Link from Zelda saying that they wanted to give him boo-boo kisses, which, yes, I'm sure that everyone was just, it was a playful interaction, but still that sort of dialogue I don't think you would see in other very masculine spaces or other spaces that are predominantly occupied by men. I felt like people were able to break down these strong gender boundaries and instead embrace a more romantic and empathetic type of masculinity. And in the corner, I have a quote from one of my respondents, Usagi, who, talking about one of his favorite characters, said, "He is soft. He is incredibly soft, but he's also a top at the same time." And then he then reflected this on himself, saying, "I can be very soft when it comes to the relationships in my life." So again, I feel like BL yaoi has been, for many of the people who I interviewed, a way to bridge both identifying as a masculine person, but also having a sense of softness and romance and kindness. And here's my point on parody and banter, which I'm still developing. So when I say parody, I am using Judith Butler's definition of parody, which is a kind of gender performance that will enact and reveal the performativity of gender itself in a way that destabilizes the naturalized categories of identity and desire. So an example of this could be drag. That's usually what's thought of as a type of gender parody. what I saw being in this Discord and talking to people is that there tended to be a lot of parody that was intentionally subverting hegemonic masculinity and compulsory heterosexuality. And this was done through making fun of archetypes of hypermasculine and perhaps closeted men, where people would joke around and say, no homo, act like a man, you're gay, that's gay. I'm not going to say the last line because this is being recorded and I'm just not giving out a soundbite of me saying that, but if this was not being recorded, I would have said it. But what I'm saying here is that this type of humor, which I'm terming ironic homophobia, I feel like really works in this space because having the setting being a BL yaoi server, it establishes the notion of this being a safe and queer-friendly space. And for parody to work, it requires some assumption of the sexuality of the speaker and the receiver. So if you were calling someone gay as a joke, it would not go over well if both parties weren't gay, is sort of the vibe that I picked up from my analysis of these interactions. And people, when I asked about, so what's the deal with all of the ironic homophobia that I see in the server, a lot of people said to me that they are utilizing this as a sort of reclamatory practice to disempower the weight of people using those terms against them in an insulting way. So disempowering compulsive heterosexuality and heterosexism. One of my respondents said, if you say it and hear it enough in a safe context, it doesn't get to you anymore when someone tries to hurt you with it. And I also noticed this parody and banter interacting with me in a really fun way. So going back to that insider-outsider position, I had been very worried and conscientious of my role as a woman and a researcher in a queer men's space. But one sort of fun example was when I posted a selfie of myself, mostly trying to be like, hey, I'm a real person, please let me interview you. I got a lot of fun responses saying, oh, you look good, no hetero again, and then people joking saying I was going to say full hetero, as riffing on the no homo culture. So to summarize this, I feel like because this was a space that was dedicated to BL yaoi, there was this underlying assumption that everyone here is either queer or is cool with queer stuff. And so people were able to sort of parody this archetype of a toxic masculine man. And in doing so, it was able to make fun or make light of these sort of oppressive structures of gender and sexuality in a safe space, so that when you're offline, it sort of takes some of the wind out of the insult. And my final point that I've been building in my research is this concept of BL yaoi acting as a mechanism for international queer community building. So something that a reoccurring theme in my research was how BL yaoi acted as like a signifier of this is a safe space for the LGBT community. One of the really awesome quotes that I got from an interviewee was saying how because this is a BL yaoi centric server, it's like putting a sign in front of your house saying, hey, there's gay people here. And he went on to elaborate that you're not going to join a server like this and be surprised to see a lot of gay men. Which again, I also made sense to me, but I thought it was interesting in the backdrop of how much academic discourse and public discourse there is about BL and yaoi fandom not being a space for queer men. Clearly, a lot of my interviewees disagreed with this notion. And so, even if people who I interviewed said they're not as invested in keeping up with BL yaoi media anymore, they frequently talked about how they still are very engaged in the server, not just for the content that's being shared, but to socialize with other queer men. And this also seemed to relate to people saying how they might have felt disconnected from the LGBT plus community in real life. And I think this is also contingent on I started my research a little bit after 2020. So I think the pandemic lockdown really emphasized the importance of these online friendships and social connections, such as one of my interviewees telling me how the server had been his primary sense of social fulfillment throughout the pandemic. And again, I really want to emphasize how this server that I was in, while BL Yaoi was the focus, it felt much broader than that. There were hotlines for LGBT plus support and other types of social resources in over 10 different countries. There were also channels that were utilized to discuss personal issues ranging to relationship woes, to I would hear people talking about immigration advice if they wanted to immigrate to a more queer-friendly country over voice chat and Let's Plays. And so, again, I really feel like part of the importance of what I found in doing this project is how BL Yaoi is not just important for this sense of individual identity work, of coming to terms with one's own sexuality, it's building these social connections and support systems across country lines, which I thought was really incredible. So just a bit going forward, something that I want to touch on because I don't want to present BL fandom as a utopia, right? While it is wonderful and there are many wonderful things that I touched on, I do think it's important to also look at ways that things can be improved. So going forward, I would love for my research to have more of a focus on the intersections of race. Many interviewees highlighted that they enjoyed BL Yaoi media, which included a variety in character designs, especially in terms of body type and race. Camp Buddy was a frequent flyer in people telling me their favorite type of BL media. And I also noted that there was still, though, this underlying sense of racial tension in BL Yaoi fandom. And this is not specific to that Discord server, but just in general. The one interviewee who I mentioned earlier, who had the pseudonym of Blackbeard, who's a Black American, he discussed his experiences of racism in BL fandom and also past Discord servers. And this is not really a new thing to discuss. There has been research published on online fan spaces such as /fanfiction communities. Scholars such as Rukmini Pandey have argued that they may perpetuate white-centered queer perspectives and alienate people of color within fandom. So I think it's important to keep that in mind. And also for my own research, as I'm talking about how BL can challenge traditional conceptualizations of masculinity, there's also the fact, though, that Asian men, particularly queer Asian men, are perceived as inhabiting emasculated positions in Eurocentric society. So, in other words, the assumptions of masculinity for an Asian man in Japan versus an Asian man in the United States is going to be different because of these issues of white supremacy. So going forward, I would love to look at especially the perspectives of queer Asian men who live in either Europe or North America to talk more about how their own positions as in the intersection of gender, race, and sexuality in this cultural context, how does that influence their perspective towards BL media and the potential for BL media to challenge stereotypes of gender and sexuality. So, in conclusion, despite past literature discrediting BL Yaoi as not a gay genre, queer men nonetheless can find symbolic significance in this type of media. And a lot of my findings are aligning with current modern research. My goal is to expand beyond just talking about BL markets and fandoms in Asia and take a look at how BL fandom operates in Anglophone, Eurocentric, or American-centric fandom spaces. And I feel that these findings also offer further insight into how erotic materials are understood as a type of cultural text and how it relates to our understandings and challenges of performing gender and sexuality. Overall, BL Fandom is a space to understand, explore, and experiment with queer identity, and also it can be a space to experiment with masculinity, and furthermore, be a space for queer international community building. I feel that it has a potential to really build a support system that goes beyond national lines. And so my future goals here are to continue developing my qualitative data collection. I have an article that's currently under review to be published, which is very exciting, and hopefully go on to take this project to my dissertation. So here are my works cited. If anyone wants these links or further details on these, I would be happy to share. And lastly, thank you. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you to CitrusCon for having me. And I wanted to thank all of my online friends who have supported me through this research, and also all the lovely people who have agreed to interview with me. Your trust and support of my project really means the world. So that is my presentation. I wanted to end a bit early in case if anyone has questions. So I will stop sharing my screen. And I will check chat. Oh wow, there's a lot of messages. So if anyone has have any questions, I would be more than happy to answer, either about my research, the methods. Yeah. And I will definitely, if people want to send me a direct message asking for either the work cited or any of my graphs, I would be more than happy to share. There's just a lot of messages that would be a little hard to keep track of, and I just don't want to miss anybody. So please just reach out to me directly. I would love to share my resources. So I see a question. As an ace yaoi fan myself, I would love to know how common asexuals are in yaoi fandom, considering that the topic is inherently sexual. Do you know if there's research out there already on the topic? So that's a great question. In my undergrad research, as I noted, there was, I believe, following bisexuality, identifying as asexual was the second most common identity of my respondents there. And while I can't name off the top of my head any published research on asexuality, specifically, I can at least touch on what I found in my undergrad research, which was how BL yaoi, and I should clarify, I'm using the terms BL yaoi because many of my respondents use those terms interchangeably, while others see them as two distinct things. So just for the sake of clarification, I say BL yaoi just as like the umbrella term. So yes, so about asexuality, I think it really connects to the overarching themes that I've seen about this media being a space to explore sexuality. And I think for at least the asexual respondents of my survey study that I did back in 2020, what people told me in the open-ended responses was that while if they may not have sexual attraction or want to have sex in their personal lives, this media was still a space for them to connect with their, how should I put it? It was still space to explore sexuality as a concept, even if it wasn't directly related to them personally. And it was still a way to explore intimacy and emotion and character growth. So I thought that that perspective was really interesting. So again, I don't know of any studies that have specifically looked at asexual fans of BL, but I think it would be a really fascinating topic to go into. And I should also say what I've found over and over not just in my research, but in porn studies in general, there's an understanding that what you find engaging in erotic media is not necessarily connected to what you find engaging in real life. So I just wanted to put that out there, that that's a very, 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 very common theme in at least porn studies and sociology of sexuality literature. How is the ethics IRB process read Discord participant observation? Tough. Really, really challenging. Just in general, wanting to do research on this topic and talk to people was very hard. Yeah, so it was tough. And what I really had to do was, one, find examples of people who have done online research before. So my whole methodology is designed around the Association of Internet Researchers. They have a ethics guideline, so I followed that. And also I made sure to get permission from the mod team of the Discord that I was in, just to announce my presence and say, hey, I'm working on this project about BL. Is it okay if I hang out and get interviewees? And really clarify that I'm using pseudonyms for the server. I'm using pseudonyms for my interviewees. Any quotes that I use in publications are going to be tweaked so that people can't search the quotes, and that's something that has also been recommended by ethics guidelines by the Association of Online Researchers. So I really had to have a very robust ethical guideline in order to do this research. Was there anything interesting you found about non-cis perspectives while doing your study? Yes, that's something that's still ongoing, as I'm in the process of interviewing a few trans participants. In my initial draft of this study, and really the data that you saw right now, everyone who I talked to was either cisgender, or should I say, there were people who said that they don't mind what pronouns you use for them, but they didn't directly identify as transgender or non-binary. So a little bit of gender fluidity there. And so I've been working more on trying to find more trans men specifically who I can talk to, but what I will say is that I've found at least the server that I've been hanging out in to be very, very trans positive, and from people who I'm still currently interviewing saying that they feel pretty respected as trans men in this space. So I'm sorry I don't have a more robust answer to that, but that is something that I'm considering and working on developing in my study. Do you have any reading suggestions for porn studies books? You're doing research for my master's on a similar topic, pro-shipping and anti-shipping. Have been reading Foucault's History of Sexuality over the summer. Yes, I can absolutely send you some resources. If you don't mind reaching out to me in DMs, because I'll probably send you a long list. I will say Jennifer Nash, I think her book is The Black Body in Ecstasy. Jennifer Nash is just a really great author and has written some really compelling works about pornography and the black body in ecstasy, looking at sort of issues of when you only look at pornography as just good or bad, especially is this good representation or bad representation, you're leaving out a lot of possibilities of what pornography can mean to people. So yeah, if you don't mind reaching out, or I can write your name down and send you a list. But your research sounds great. I also recommend Sam Abarime's work. They've been publishing on pro-shipping, anti-shipping discourse. I think they have 2 articles by now, so I highly recommend Sam's work. Sam is also a guest at this con, so definitely talk to them. I have a question regarding my research. Are there any resources that you look to as far as BL fans in Japan, East Asia who identify as queer? Yes. Yeah, so my research, to clarify, is specifically looking at, I'll say for right now, Anglophone fandom, so fandom that is English speaking, and this is really mostly because my Japanese is not that good. It's really not that good to interview people, so for now, I'm staying in my lane and talking to people who can be interviewed in English. But I will say Thomas Baudinet, again, his research is awesome. He has published a book, I think it's Regimes of Desire, that is looking at queer men in Japan. And there's a few other resources. Again, if you could reach out to me, I would love to just send you a list. Let's see. Did you ever come across in studies or interviews the desires for increased body diversities within the genre, or have found that subgenres like bara were a direct response to the idea on how masculinity should be presented opposed to the traditional young, skinny, feminine characters? Yeah, so I think this was an interesting, not a conflict in my study, but there were people who I interviewed who felt really represented by the sort of skinny, feminine design of male characters. They felt very seen by that because that's how they look, and they felt ostracized by mainstream beauty standards for men, which is, very buff and tall and hypermasculine. But at the same time, there were also men who were not young, skinny, feminine, who were not super fit. So plus size men who I talked to would mention that they wanted to see more of that diversity. And some people also commented that they liked some of the body types in gay komi, which is also called bara sometimes in the West. They would note that while they enjoy some of the body types that are seen in gay komi, they don't like the more hyper-masculine expressions of sexuality that gay komi is kind of known for. So I think there was a bit of tension there between people who felt really seen by BL and people who really were not seen, felt represented by BL, but didn't like other avenues of representation. So I'm not sure. I hope that answers your question. Yeah, that's what I got. Romance as a genre gets a bad rap and is seen as frivolous for women, which it is. Hilariously goofy because it's one of the most popular genres of anything. I absolutely agree. Yeah, I could go on a while about this. I think part of why BL has such a bad rap is because it is a romance. But again, something that I want to emphasize is really, I think every single person who I interviewed talked about how they loved the depiction of romance in BL. And many even said that they don't really like BL that is very sexual, or they don't care as much about the sex scenes. Really what they're in it for is this depiction of romance between men. So yeah, I think while mainstream society kind of brushes off the value of romance, I think for queer people in general, having these depictions of romance are not only enjoyable to read, but also just really touching and hopeful. Oh, and someone also asked where they could read my research. I have my dissertation, or not my dissertation, getting ahead of myself. I have my undergrad thesis published on academia.edu, or I could also just send you a PDF, but it's completely free to access. I do have an article that is in the works on BL. It's being reviewed by a journal right now, so hopefully when those reviews go through and it gets accepted for publication, I don't know if I can say the name of the journal that is reviewing my work, but it is a journal that is free for anyone to read and online. So if you stay connected with me on social media, I'm Caitlin Studies on Twitter. Once when I get published, I would love to share the link. My DMs are not open. Oh no, I'm so sorry. I will try and fix that. Let's see, I've got about 10 more minutes. Was there any representation in responses from femme-identifying respondents enjoying the medium because people of the same gender are equal? This is often a reason why I enjoyed the genre. Yes, so in my current study, I'm only interviewing queer men. That's just a parameter I set for myself to really go deep into a specific audience base. But for my undergrad survey, as I stated, it was mostly women and non-binary people. And many, many, many people talked about how they felt that more mainstream media, the depictions of gender roles were very restrictive. And especially for women, many people touched on how they just didn't enjoy the way how women were depicted in media because of sexism, or especially because of their own sexual trauma, if that was an issue in their life. They still wanted to see depictions of romance and sexuality, but one that didn't come with essentially the baggage of womanhood, if that makes sense. So that was a very common thread in my survey responses, of this idea of BL characters often being equal, or people of the same gender love being something of a romance between equals, because romance that depicts men and women, often the characters are not equal and are unfortunately weighed down by heteronormative and misogynistic tropes. So that's not the focus of my research right now, but I do go into that in my undergrad thesis, which, like I said, that is free and open online. Were there any responses to your study that you found particularly surprising? Did you happen to find some really critical critique to why it maybe isn't something they want to idealize for themselves? So there was certainly critique of the genre. I don't want to say that all of my respondents thought that BL was amazing and had zero critiques of it. So there were definitely critiques, especially, like I said, critiquing the seme-uke trope, or critiquing some of the more intense kinks or more violent kinks. And then there were some people who loved that type of content. So I don't want to generalize anything. I think what I found surprising anticipating that. I thought everyone who I talked to would be super into BL, but it seemed like a lot of people talked about how BL was really important to them in the past, and they still enjoy it, but really what keeps them engaged and active in BL fandom was not necessarily the content, but because of the social connections that they made with other people. So that I found really interesting. I'm trying to think if there was any other very critical critiques. I think I covered most of the critiques that I had heard. I also found that really not that many people were, I guess, put off by me being a woman in a very queer men's central space. There were a few people who I talked to who seemed to be kind of critical of the Fujoshi archetype, or felt that Fujoshi did fetishize queer men, but overall I felt that the general vibe was we all like BL and that's cool. So yeah, I think I expected maybe to see more people very critical of Fujoshi in a queer men space, or to talk to more queer men who were super critical of Fujoshi, but that was really not the impression that I had. It seemed like people were very ambivalent at worst towards Fujoshi, and were just yeah, some women like BL, I like BL, it's cool. So that was another surprise. I will go back and see. I have 4 minutes left. If I missed anything. I think that is about everything. But yeah, thank you guys again for everyone who came and tuned in. This was really exciting to present at CitrusCon. I really had fun combining some of my slides from the anime conventions that I've gone to and also the slides that I've presented at academic conferences. It's also really nice to present and not have to like painstakingly explain what BL is, as is the case often when I have to explain my research at school. So yeah, it's always really lovely to engage with people in fandom. Please, if you want to keep in touch, I will make sure that people can DM me or if you want to send me a friend request. And if you want to keep up with me, unfortunately, I am still on Twitter. I don't think I'll ever leave Twitter. I'm here until it dies. So you can find me. I can put my username in the chat, and I think it's also in the links channel. But I'm at Caitlin Studies if you want to reach out to me there. If you don't get a chance to reach out to me on Discord, I would love to chat about research. All I do every day is read research. So if you want resources, I have plenty. That's kind of my job. So yes, it was really lovely to present. Again, thank you all so much for being such a great audience and having great questions. And thank you to my friends who came here to support me. I love you guys, especially all my online friends. You're the ones who inspire me to do this type of research. And also thank you if any of my interviewees are here. I think I saw one of you in the audience. Thank you guys so much. Thank you for allowing me to do this type of research. It was really great. So yes, thank you everyone.